Welcome to the Blitz Growth Podcast. Listen in to learn how founders, entrepreneurs, and creators build and scale their businesses online. Let's get started.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Blitz Growth, and today I've got a really good and old friend here, Jarahad Valeri, who has done some extremely impressive things. Started a water bottle company or water shaker company, and has developed a product and taken it worldwide. So all the way from the design, product market fit, to branding, to distribution. So today you're going to learn a bunch about that and really understand what sort of goes into building an awesome product, and then what goes behind the branding of that. So Jarahad, nice to have you.
Cheers. Thanks for having me, Paxton. Appreciate it.
No problem. So Jarahad and I actually used to go to university together long time ago.
I think it started even before that. I think it was primary school, into high school, and then into university.
Probably a good 25 plus years now.
Yeah, I think it has been.
But awesome. Today I wanted to talk mostly about MOUS Fitness, because I know MOUS or mousefitness.com if anybody wants to check it out while they're listening. So an awesome brand that you guys developed a while ago, and you've been at it for how many years now?
So we initially started concept development in 2014. So it's been a few years.
Okay.
Shit. Now that I say that, I sort of realize, and I didn't realize it's been that long. But no, it's been 6 years.
Yeah, it's always the case. It flies by when you're doing it.
It creeps up on you quickly. Oh
yeah, definitely. So to start off with, just wanted to sort of go back to the starting point then, 2014.
Yep.
Where'd you get the idea to start a luxury high-end sort of shaker bottle, fitness bottle? Or how do you describe it anyway, actually, to customers? Like
that's a really good question, because it's actually something that we try to identify for some time, and it's the way in which we refer to the product now is very, very different to how we referred to the product when we first launched. When we did first launch in 2000, and we ended up launching in 2015. After that sort of first year of concept development and understanding what we're going to do as a shaker bottle, but we do now sell it as a fitness bottle, and we'll get into why that sort of occurred shortly, no doubt. But I guess it all started with identifying a problem. My partner or business partner and I, we used to attend to the gym together. And I still remember clear as day, we were sitting on the couch because we were also housemates at the time, and he just looked at me. He was cleaning his shaker bottle at the time, and he looked at me and goes, "Do you experience this problem?" And it was just build up of supplement in the bottom of his shaker bottle that led to odor, and I said yes. And so that was as simple as it was. As to where we started, was just identifying that initial problem, and then further identifying whether or not other people had the same issue.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start as well. Like, most people definitely maybe overthink their ideas or overthink the commitment that they need to have towards an idea or to have towards a starting business. But really, most companies, I think, probably start from the founders scratching their own itch.
It's so true.
And you probably, as you probably found, a lot of people also had that issue, because the protein shaker bottle hasn't really ever been reimagined.
Yeah, it's so true. It's your typical sort of your cup and then a lid, and the reason being is Blender Bottle, who are still by far the market leader, they had a stronghold on the market, and quite frankly they still do, but they were complacent. They were complacent in the product that they had established. And the reason for their complacency is they were selling, and they were selling really well, and consumers didn't realize what they actually needed nor wanted. And we sort of took that next step to identify whether or not there was a deeper desire or a problem to solve.
Yeah, so anybody listening out there who thinks they're too small to compete, definitely not the case, and can sometimes be your advantage. All of these major companies, especially right now, was with 2020 being the year of change for most industries. Right now, moving fast is a huge advantage that you should take advantage. Doesn't make sense, but you should definitely take advantage of being able to iterate and change quickly, because some of these big giants, they have their process and systems which they just can't shake too quickly.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And just on that point, there's some interesting research that's been done by a few different, I think McKinsey did some, and then there's been some other research companies that have done it. But what they've found is people are most likely to change brands after a huge life event. And every single person in the world right now is going through a life event. Therefore, they're going to be more susceptible to jumping ship to another brand or a product that fulfills their needs or desires. So I couldn't agree more with you on that, Jack. It's definitely a great time to start looking to whether not necessarily piggyback off what's occurred, but really sort of identify where opportunities now lie, because opportunities are different now than they were 12 months ago.
Yeah, that's right as well. Like the habits, like even just, thinking about my life and how that's changed, like my habits have completely changed. Yeah. Like what I do day to day is so different compared to what I was doing on the day to day in 2019. The products and brands I use are also completely different. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, now that I know in Australia, we've been forced to obviously work from home quite a lot, and the processes and the SaaS companies and then platforms that we were using 12 months ago, basically we don't use whatsoever anymore, except for probably the exception of Slack. But we've sort of done a complete rejig of our tech stack as well on that front. So, I mean, there's always opportunity. And as, like you said, as behaviors change, something's going to pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point to put out there and a good idea for founders to grab onto. So going back to that starting point, always the hardest dollar to make is your first dollar. So how did you get your first, let's say 10 customers? And then, were they paid or were they free? Giving out free product, and then how do you make your first $1,000?
Alrighty. That's a really good question, because we have a pretty rocky start. I'm not going to lie. We, after doing our initial sort of research and finding our suppliers and the manufacturers and everything in between, we came with a product and we had this price that we needed to sell for. And the reason I'm telling you this now is because this shoots us in the foot very, very hard. We were lucky enough to start.
Everybody listen up.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to start doing influencer marketing on Instagram before Instagram was purchased by Facebook, before influencer marketing was even really a thing. So we weren't paying for influencers that had over 100,000, if not more. It was just a gift product, and they will advertise. And as you would know, the algorithms back then were nowhere near what they are now. And so our reach on those posts were far, far greater than what you can do even when it's paid now. So we were super fortunate from that perspective. And that's after we like to take a traction approach where we identify all the various, once we've got an objective of what we want to achieve, we identify all the various tactical things that we can be doing to try and achieve that. And influencer marketing at this time was the most sort of beneficial and profitable, not necessarily profitable, but best return on investment for us at that time. And so we started doing that, and all we were doing is this is driving traffic to a landing page where we were collecting emails. So a very, very simple landing page. I look back at it now and I'm like, what were we doing? But you know what? It worked at the time. And we
made so much money.
Yeah, I know. Seriously, I look back and I just kick myself. But it is what it is. Hindsight's a hell of a thing. But we ended up collecting around 35 to 40,000 emails within the space of maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And a lot of that was driven through Instagram influencers. And what we did is we decided to launch a Kickstarter, a Kickstarter campaign. What we didn't realize is we had priced Kickstarter now we've got all these insights. We understand how Kickstarter really, really works. We didn't at the time. I'm going to be completely honest. We had no clue what we were doing. We actually launched on Kickstarter. Yeah, exactly. We launched on Kickstarter when they had just opened up to Australia. So it was relatively new for the Australian market as well. But in order to fund our entire project, especially from the manufacturing side, it was made the most sense because we were bootstrapping. We weren't taking any investment. And so we launched and we used that email list and we sent them to our campaign, and we reached maybe 20% of our total budget that we were trying to achieve within sort of that first 24 to 48 hours. But we would have received around 8,000 emails of absolute hate. Absolute hate. And the reason being, we didn't understand from the emails that we had collected who our target demographic was. And going back to what I was saying before with pricing, we had put our price at, I think it was $50 at the time, because we were getting ripped off somewhere along our supply chain. So we had no choice. That was the only way that we could do it, to sell our product and to get to a stage where we were going to be able to fund the rest of the project. Yeah. And so we had to put up a really high price. And what we found was a significant proportion of the emails in which we had collected were from the States. And the US are used to getting a shaker bottle for free when they purchase supplements, or for $9.99 when they buy from a GNC or similar. And so we've gone out to them with the U-Butte product, but it's $50, 5 times the price, and they couldn't see the value. And so we ended up, that Kickstarter campaign ended up failing. We ended up calling it after about 3 weeks. But what it allowed us to do, it still allowed us to prove concept. And with the interest that we had gathered, we're like, well, you know what? Yes, we haven't done it correctly right now. However, what's not worked right now, and how do we reiterate and go back to the drawing board and identify how we meet the consumers better, how we better meet the consumers' needs. And so after that, we went back to the drawing board, and so the rest is history from there.
Yeah. Well, I've got a few questions around that, actually, and it's so good that you share that story, because I think not enough of those stories get shared. It's always like, you know, overnight I made $1 billion and now I'm super successful, which is never the case. There's always there's always a story behind it. There's always, you know, years of work that goes into an overnight success, I say. So having said that, with Kickstarter, knowing what you know now, would you do another Kickstarter? So say you're starting from scratch, would you do another Kickstarter or no?
This is a really good question, and it's actually something that me and my business partners talk about on like a pretty regular occurrence. And we're getting ready to launch another brand shortly, and we did question whether or not we do Kickstarter or not for it. And I think there's two reasons. I think that there's two opposing sort of ideas around this. And I think Kickstarter is great if you don't have the capital. It is wonderful. I think the best part, in my mind, with Kickstarter, though, is nowadays there is so much built around Kickstarter and Indiegogo that where you're most successful is the earned media that you get if you are successful. And I've seen some companies do really, really well from the earned media, let alone just generating the capital in which they needed to begin with. And that's, in my mind, I think the best part about Kickstarter, and why the only reason for us that we would consider it is because of the earned media that we could get from it. We, however, aren't going to launch on Kickstarter, because I also think that there is a level of, I guess, pigeonholing yourself or your brand to being a Kickstarter brand. Now, that isn't for all brands, don't get me wrong, but I think depending on the category, depending on your consumer and depending on your distribution or sales partners, I think there can be a negative connotation to being a Kickstarter brand. And I've seen that in saying all of this, I've definitely seen it being that whole idea being proved wrong. So I think you need to just really weigh it up, identify what it is that you really, really need and what are your circumstances, because it can be a very, very powerful platform.
Yeah, because I do definitely see the value in the earned media rather than the actual amount funded. Because, you know, I know, for example, once you get a funded project within a certain amount of time, you get featured in the Kickstarter newsletter, which goes out to 1 million people or something, and that's where you really get your traction from. But you guys obviously have the capital, so you don't need to do that. Earned media would be nice, but it sounds like, I kind of agree with you, because as soon as you've gone on Kickstarter or like Shark Tank or any of these sort of programs where they're looking at raising money and awareness, you get that automatically defaults to becoming your marketing message.
It's true. That's exactly right.
So, everybody's like, okay, 100% funded in 3 days on Kickstarter, or as seen on Shark Tank, or whatever it may be. Like, that's all of a sudden your best marketing message, and it's got nothing to do with your product.
Exactly, and that's the biggest thing. I think you've absolutely nailed that. And like, it's very, very hard then to start telling the right product message or the right brand message once you're only associated with being funded on those platforms. You're absolutely correct.
No, it's really interesting because I've never done a Kickstarter. I've definitely worked with brands who have, and we've pretty much just driven paid media traffic from Google and Facebook and Instagram to get their Kickstarter funded. They've actually like lost money on the actual funding. They've been like, okay, well, I'm going to try and raise 20,000, but I'm going to spend $20,000 on ads to raise that 20,000.
And that's a really good point that you raised, because I think a lot of people think that you're going to put a campaign up on Kickstarter and it's going to get funded. It drives traffic for you, when in fact that's actually not the case. There is still a lot of work from a marketing and advertising standpoint to be done in order to drive awareness around your campaign, and then drive retention, and then leverage what you've built from there. So it's not a simple sort of launch a campaign and then you're good to go, unfortunately. But I guess I have seen some brands that have launched on Kickstarter before and they continue to launch on Kickstarter, and it's actually working really, really well for them because they've already got an established consumer base that they can then leverage to then drive that initial awareness to that campaign, get funded, use the algorithm for Kickstarter, and then earn that media. So I guess, again, it's all circumstantial. But we won't be using Kickstarter for this particular new brand that we're launching, no.
Yeah, so for anybody listening, bit of a checklist for you. Got to decide whether you're going to use Indiegogo or Kickstarter to fund your company. If you don't have the capital, it's a good idea. If you are going to do it, you need to come with your own audience. Kickstarter's not going to give you the audience for you. So that's an email list or paid media. And then also you've got to be ready to, you've got to be ready to put in the legwork. It's not a put it up on Kickstarter and all of a sudden you've got your company fully funded. Yeah. Just consider those when you go to launch. The other question that I was going to have around your new product launch, actually. First off, I was going to share actually a quick story about how I think Product Hunt is similar to that.
Yep.
For SaaS World. Our first our first Product Hunt went really well because it was such in the early days. Like, we didn't do any planning. We accidentally got featured, and then it did really well just because I think we got very lucky. And then the second or third time that we've launched something, it just hasn't gone very well. We haven't gotten the virality aspect to it. I think we were too forceful in driving traffic to the page and kind of like forcing upvotes and that sort of stuff. So all of these like marketplaces and networks can be really good, but I definitely think there's an aspect of luck involved. And then, the early bird always gets the worm. So on my next question, what do you think will be the future of physical products getting funded? So if you see that Kickstarter and Indiegogo are getting a little bit saturated or becoming a little bit less effective, what do you think kind of new founders could be doing alternatively to sort of get their products funded?
That's a great question. To be completely honest, it's something that I haven't probably thought about in a great level of depth, because we've been fortunate enough to build our own capital. However, nice. I think, and don't get me wrong, it's probably not as much as you'd also want, but it's also a great starting point. And there's that whole issue of dilution and whatnot when you start taking on equity, but that's another story in itself. But look, I think for founders, there's an absolute myriad of ways to get funded. There's now platforms that, rather than say Kickstarter, that you can use to actually get investment instead of actually selling product per se. And I've seen that work well with some
equity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've seen some good companies sort of do really well through that. On this sort of note though, direct to consumer companies are a great example that there is definitely funding still for physical products if you have the right product. All the D2C companies have raised an absolute abundance of capital in the last sort of 24 to 36 months. And they definitely are proof that there is money out there, and that these equity partners are willing to invest in physical products and the brand component of direct-to-consumer brands. So I think it's finding the right partners. But one thing that I would highly recommend is getting equity doesn't solve all of your problems. Like the Quibi, I think it's Quibi. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but that is the perfect example of not all the money in the world and some great individuals behind it, but all the money in the world doesn't mean you're going to be successful. And so I'm a big advocate on doing everything as a side hustle to begin with, whilst you're in a job that is allowing you to learn, is allowing you to earn money, and is allowing you to work on that side project on the side and really build your way up. You also then don't have that the initial dilution which you would have as well with bringing on equity from the very, very get-go. And so I'm a big person on doing it yourself to begin with until you no longer can. I think a lot of people will also be surprised that you can start a business, whether it's a SaaS business, a physical product, a service, with less money than you think you need. You just need to get creative, and you really need to just identify what it is that the consumer wants in regards to your category that you're going after.
Yeah, so that leads on to another big question that we always get to kind of like early stage founders who are looking to get into the physical space, usually Shopify store or something. So many people come up to me and ask me about drop shipping. Every time I'm just like, terrible idea, don't do it. But at the same time, you do have to have some capital to go and buy your first production run. So, I think again, back in the day, drop shipping was working, and then, everybody started doing it. Quality of the product started getting worse. The profit margin started getting worse. Unethical practices started getting abused in the way that these products were sold and marketed and that sort of stuff. And I think that's kind of led to, a bunch of problems in that space, which has made dropshipping kind of, the less inferior option than someone who's fulfilling their own orders. They have their own manufacturing, their own products that are unique, all that sort of stuff. All kind of common sense. But what would you kind of say would be a good way for someone to, get enough money then to do their first production run? Or do they not need money for a production run? Can they go to a manufacturer and say, hey, can I do a test run? Or what's the process there that you would probably do a second time around now that you know how the industry works? Yeah,
that is a good point. I wish that you could go to manufacturers and they would cover the costs of an initial production run whereby you pay them back. Unfortunately, I've not been so lucky to find that. So I haven't found that manufacturer yet. But I think there is definitely ways in which you can build capital without having physical product. And for example, like textiles, I mean, even products like ours. So when we did our Kickstarter, we didn't obviously have a production yet, but we had done prototypes, and the prototypes would have cost us less than $2,000, but we had physical prototypes that were a complete reflection of the product. And what we were able to do once we've got that is we were initially able to sell that. And that's through the initial marketing that we were doing and building that email list rather than necessarily taking money. But I think that you do have the ability to generate money without a product. And the way I would go about that now is I'm a big person on market research. So first and foremost, I would do a significant amount of both secondary, then qualitative and then quantitative market research from a product marketing, consumer sales perspective, all different facets of the business, and identify in the end what it is that your consumer really, really does desire. And unfortunately, what a consumer says they want and what a consumer actually wants can be very, very different. So make sure you're doing all forms of research. And once you've got that research, you're very, very confident in an idea. Don't necessarily go out and just invest straight into it. Like you're only at sort of stage one. How do we now prove concept that this exact product that we've got in mind is the right product to actually bring to market? And there is definitely ways in which you can create prototypes, whether it's textiles, whether it's SaaS, whether it's physical product, whatever it may be. And I believe that you should definitely start with prototypes and see if you can actually make money off of it. So whether it is doing essentially like your own Kickstarter per se, where you set up a shop, for example, which costs you bugger all these days, whether you've got platforms like Shopify and BigCommerce and whatnot, and you actually start to take pre-orders. But you do pre-orders directly through your own platform. You're not sending traffic to another platform. You're owning, basically, you're capturing all of that data and information that you can then leverage and see whether or not you can make those initial sales. Because there's also a big misconception that if you've got an email address, you've got a sale. Unfortunately, that's not the case. it's getting someone to hand over money is the hardest thing that you can possibly do. And I think if you can prove that, then you can at least have that confidence that then you're going to sell. And so in my mind, and I've seen people do this really well, especially in the textile space, because samples are extremely cheap and you can get sort of 100 or 200 samples and they're going to cost you bugger all. You can send them out to influencers, for example, or you can do whatever type of marketing you need to drive traffic to a pre-order platform where they can actually make sales and go from there. Like, I've recently done this. I helped a friend launch a new business earlier this year, and we took pre-orders, and we didn't have the product. We were 2 weeks out of commencing the product and getting that into mass production, but we took pre-orders, and we were just extremely transparent with anyone that came to our website, and we informed them that this is, in fact, you're not going to get your product right away, but you are buying essentially early access to the product, and we will send it out as soon as possible. And as long as you're transparent, I think it's a really good way to go, because we generated the capital that we needed to then proceed forward.
Yeah, we've definitely worked with a few brands that do that as well, but not necessarily at the start. Anytime they're doing a new product drop, so this is mostly in the apparel space. Yeah. Anytime they're doing a new product drop, they'll give out 1,000 pre-orders, and so you have to pay a premium to get that pre-order, and they haven't even placed that order yet. They've just got the designs with their manufacturer. They'll collect all the money from the pre-order, they'll buy their batch, and then what they sell on top of that is just pure profit. Yep. So the pre-ordering can be done really well. There was another brand that we were working with, and they were like taking pre-orders for a product that wasn't coming out till February, and it's November. Wow. So you've got to really
I hope they had a really solid terms and conditions.
Yeah, well, who knows how it's going to go. Obviously the product's not there yet, but yeah, they were doing very, very long lead times. And so if you are worried about those lead times, obviously the longer the lead time, the higher amount of drop-offs you're going to have, or the higher amount of refunds you're going to have. But don't be scared that you have to sell all of it in like a week or something in your pre-order phase. It doesn't have to happen in the first week.
I think a great example of this, sorry to interrupt, I think a great example of this is Tesla. Like, Tesla always obviously they're in a different world to all of us, okay? But they still take pre-orders for, say, their Model 3. They still take pre-orders for all of their Model 3 when they're either just about to commence production. Yeah, so...
I know so many people who bought a Cybertruck. And that thing's never going to get built.
Exactly right. Exactly.
It is funny. But no, pre-ordering is a great solution to that. But I was wondering, actually, that's a great idea for manufacturers. Why don't they literally just fund production runs, charge interest on it, and that can be like a secondary model, revenue model for them?
It's honestly something that people present. Yeah, no, it's true. It's something that we've presented to manufacturers in the start. And for whatever reason, I don't know, like, unfortunately, when you're dealing with different cultures, you definitely have different hurdles to overcome. And I don't know if it's that side. So maybe if you're manufacturing locally, or for example, you guys, if you're manufacturing in the States, maybe you do have that ability to negotiate and come to those terms. There are definitely what we can call turnkey manufacturers that will actually partner with you, and they will take equity in the business, and they will basically upfront those initial costs and continue to do so. But obviously you're still diluting, but it's not necessarily equity or capital that you're getting, but you're getting product. So that definitely does exist. But again, it's that whole idea of, okay, are you ready to dilute? And then again, it's also pitching the idea to those manufacturers and making sure, one, they're the right fit for your business, but two, on their behalf, that you're the right product and they're going to make money from you.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, because I was talking to another guy the other week, and he was doing Amazon stores.
Yep.
So what he would do is he'd find a product, he'd do the research, he'd had his connections with all of his manufacturers. He knew how to get to the buy box on Amazon. He would build them up, and then he'd sell it to this other company who then just takes over Amazon stores, and they have a portfolio of 50 different Amazon stores.
Yeah.
And so, I'm surprised manufacturers don't do something like that and just kind of monopolize on industries. But yeah, crazy. Getting to the next step, you guys did extremely well finding product market fit. especially on the global scale. We'd love to go into, obviously, we're from Australia, and the Australian market isn't the biggest market. And so, especially for $50 protein shakers. So how did you sort of, expand past that? Because, there's so much opportunity for the luxury item in other areas of the world. Like Australia definitely has a super high level of living, very, very wealthy country. But, there's just not enough people there to make these massive companies like you see in the rest of the world. So how did you sort of get past Australia? And I know you have like a huge distribution network in Asia. And how did that process go? And what's your experiences there for other people who are thinking about trying to launch into the Asian market, because it's a growing segment?
Yeah, look, I think, again, this wasn't all rosy. This was not rosy. The whole process of coming to really focus on the Asian consumer and the Asian market. And again, I wish it was, but that's not the case, and that's business. When we first launched, we went back to the drawing board and identified, okay, we know we've got a product that people want, but obviously not at the right price point. And we then went back to the drawing board and we identified, okay, what was that price point that we needed to sell for, and which suppliers do we need to either take out or change or whatever it may be. And so after doing that, we got our price to a point where it was much more feasible, and consumers saw the value in paying still a premium price for it. There wasn't an absolute extortion. And so when we first launched, we figured that Australia, obviously being there, was going to be a market of absolute focus, and then also the US. We focused on the US and Australia for probably the first 12 to 18 months, and that was our core focus. But we, again, we were faced by a huge competitor and a lack of... We were the first premium movers in the shaker space. We were the first people to be taking a product position of focusing on the health of the consumer as opposed to just being a commodity that they use to shake their supplements in. Our product wasn't necessarily an addition to their supplement process. Ours was an accessory for themselves. And so that was actually a really hard barrier to overcome. And we were still being seen as this shaker bottle that was a commodity that should be $9.99 or for free. And so unfortunately, because of the network that companies like Blender Bottle had established and the ability, the fact that they're the largest in the space, it was really quite difficult to take that market share away from them. And that sort of just led us to understanding, okay, what are we helping the consumer achieve? I'm a big believer that consumers buy products or use a service to serve a specific problem that they have or to achieve a specific goal in which they want to attain. Okay. And so, I mean, like I use a water bottle because I want to stay hydrated, for example. That's a goal. I want to stay hydrated. Okay. And what we found is after going to the US and going out to that market, we knew that people wanted our product, but the way in which they were using it was different to how we anticipated they were using it. We thought a lot of people would be using it for shakers and it would be a much more a male-dominated category. That wasn't the case. Yeah. And so what we ended up finding is a lot of our users, was actually over 55% were female, and some they lived an active lifestyle, but they supplemented. But what they also did is they use their bottles for smoothies and they use their bottle for water infusions. And this is when sort of water infusions has just started being a thing as well. And so we shifted from being what we referred to as a shaker bottle to a fitness bottle. And it's a multi-purpose fitness bottle for all of your hydration needs. And that sort of allowed us to then separate ourselves from Blender Bottle and the shaker bottle market and sort of step into this new category of consumers with a new product position. And once we had found that, we saw that we changed our product positioning, we changed our brand positioning, and we changed all of our messaging and communications, and we saw a huge uptake in that, which then actually led to, in 2017, we were picked up for the Oscars. So we were the only Australian brand in 2017 picked up for the Oscars, and we were extremely hesitant at the start because there's a lot of backlash that goes around the PR around that. However, that was wonderful in the sense that it was then able to be leveraged moving forward. And so one thing that and going on to the reason I'm telling this is because where we're going with the global side of things is we manufacture in China, and proudly so, to be completely honest. There are some wonderful manufacturers over in China, and I think China gets they get the wrong sort of misconception quite often. But there are some phenomenal manufacturers over there and that achieve really, really good quality. But when we first went there, we manufactured in a town of about 2 million people, and there was not a single gym in our first trip there. By probably our 8th time, within sort of 2-3 years of going over there, we had noticed that there was now 20 odd gyms in this one city. Wow. And I think this comes to identifying opportunities. The biggest opportunities lie where people are not looking, and companies just were not looking in these emerging markets. And so we happened to be helping a Chinese friend get prepared to launch a product themselves. And he had actually also noticed this shift. And he's like, guys, I actually think we've all seen this shift. Could there be the opportunity to actually take this to Chinese market? And that's what we did. And we were able to leverage this idea of being featured in the Oscars and whatnot, and the PR that came around that, and the growth that then helped with our business to then take that over to China, because China is very, very influenced by the Western world, and particularly the US and Australia. So we had identified that opportunity, and that was actually a huge turning point for our business. And actually where to this day we focus a lot of our resources. So through identifying that opportunity in China, we brought on a new business partner. We then with him identified the right partners that we needed from a sales and distribution perspective and marketing and whatnot. And that allowed us to sort of grow from there. But what we noticed is, through the Chinese market, they were far more willing also to pay a premium price, because it had been this validated product from a different country and from other consumers that they respected. So we were able to leverage that. And from there, it was sort of a snowball effect where we started getting recognized in the Chinese market, that had then established into sort of on-flowed into surrounding countries like Korea and Japan and Taiwan. And then we sort of diversified our resources to make sure that we were providing partners in those new locations with the right assets in which they needed to build the brand ourselves.
Yeah. No, it's phenomenal. So impressive going into that market, because it is so untouched by the Western world. And, it's massive, over 1 billion people, and, so much money in that country now. And there's one brand we work with, and we run their ads, and they sell like $1,200 pants. They literally sell like leather pants for $1,200, and 50% plus is people coming over from Asia and buying them. It's crazy how much money they'll spend on luxury items, and the amount of wealth that there actually is in that country. I know it's kind of possibly on the smaller percentage wise, and it's not like the average might be lower, but the top 1%, there's more millionaires and billionaires in Asia, in China anyways, than most of the world. So it's a huge market that not many brands have been able to get into. Not even Facebook, Google, none of the software companies can.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's the thing. I think we were very, very fortunate to have someone that we trusted that was Chinese and understood the landscape of the market to then bring on as a business partner. And it would be extremely difficult if you did not have that, I guess, insider knowledge, or someone that knew the market very, very well. And I would highly recommend to anyone that was looking to explore, whether it's China or India or any of those countries, to really think about why, firstly, you're going into that market, and then really work out how can you bring on someone or a partner. It doesn't need to be an individual, or a group of partners that is going to help you succeed in that market. Because and I'm learning every day about China. It's crazy how different the culture is and everything else is than say Australia or the US, for example. And so, I mean, having that person or that group that does understand it is absolutely beneficial. And to be honest with you, I don't think we would have been as successful as we have been if we didn't have someone that knew it as well as they did.
Yeah. Yeah. So anybody listening, if you are looking at going into those emerging markets, having a partner on the team, I assume probably an equity partner, so that there's something in it for them, not just the wage, but if you can, hiring employees. And I think, building that relationship is important. Working overseas and remote is tough. So I know you guys went there a bunch of times and probably met in person, and that maybe also helped solidify the relationship, and also possibly, working on previous projects as well. So those sort of indicators can help in choosing that partner. Because I know a lot of people do struggle to find a partner and also manufacturer.
And on that, they don't necessarily need to live there. Like our Chinese business partner lives in Melbourne, but he's a Chinese resident. He lived there most of his life. He now happens to reside in Melbourne, but he understands the landscape. He understands the market. He understands the consumer. He understands the culture. And so I don't think you necessarily need to find someone or a group of partners in the country. It definitely does help them being on the ground because you're closer to consumers. However, you can find someone within your, network locally, as long as they have had that experience and they have that knowledge of that specific country or location.
Because I do know there's a lot of legal things that you have to jump through as well. So I think having a resident is a good point too, because I know that helps on a legal standpoint, for sure. All right, so going into that, another question I had: how did that Oscars thing happen? Did they just reach out, or were you applying, or how did that just happen? They just shoot you an email?
Yeah, they shot us an email after seeing us through some influencer marketing. So just randomly. We were doing. Yeah, I know. And I don't I hate the term influencer marketing, and we actually don't do any influencer marketing anymore either. However, it definitely... You had to
you're like, no, it's rubbish now.
Yeah, seriously. It absolutely is. And so it definitely helped. And this is the whole thing, going back to what we were saying before. It's all about timing. And it was timing. We happened to be seen and reached out to, and sort of went from there.
Nice. Yeah, so just a few more questions before we wrap this up. You're launching another brand. I'm not sure if you're sharing details about it or not, but what would you do differently this time around compared to your first time around? If you were to, you're obviously going to go through that process again, what are you going to do differently, do you think?
Everything? No. No, I think we have definitely taken a different approach to the new business, and I think one of the biggest approaches that's been different is getting in consumers from the very, very beginning, from everything from the product concept development stage to the brand positioning stage, to the marketing stage, and just really understanding and taking a step back and being market orientated, whereby the consumers are basically everything here. As opposed to sort of thinking that we knew exactly what was right and not necessarily being the case. One of the other things that we're definitely going to change a little bit is with MOUS, we definitely took a more sort of shallow and wide approach when we first launched. And we're actually going to take a different approach where we go quite deep and narrow with the new launch. And to the point where, rather than focusing on sort of all of Australia and all of the US, we're only focusing on one specific city. And the reason being is we've seen the effect of network, and we believe that we have a better ability to build network within a specific location as opposed to sort of sending our resources too thin. And so we're really going to sort of take a much more micro approach when it comes to our advertising and launch to begin with, and sort of go city by city as opposed to country by country. And so that'll be super interesting to see how that sort of increases our ability to grow. And this is something that we will be documenting and comparing the two side by side as well, to identify what does work and what doesn't. But that's sort of that is probably, from the marketing side of things, probably the biggest change that we'll be making. And also, I think we'll be really focusing on building offline partners far earlier in the sales cycle than we did with our initial business as well. I think we are now in this abundance of D2C. We believe that online is everything, and unfortunately it's just not the case. I think that's a false indication, and I think it's also we can now see that with companies like Harry's and whatnot partnering with Target and whoever else it is. So I think when you're building a brand, I think it's all about physical and mental availability. Physical availability being the ability to actually purchase the product, and that's not always online. For our specific brand that we're going to be launching shortly, physical availability in store is far, far more important than our online presence. And so we'll be really focusing on that. And then obviously the mental availability is ensuring that people are aware of you, and also from a distinctive standpoint, understanding that it's you. So we're entering a super competitive market, which is, again, quite different to what we did to begin with in terms of we were sort of creating a category. Now we're not creating a category, but we're taking a really, really strong brand position against something. And so it's going to be a far, far different approach to what we were doing. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how we're received, as we are trying to be quite unique in comparison to the market leaders right now, and sort of almost taking a sort of David and Goliath approach against them. So we'll see how it goes. But I think the biggest thing is just ensuring, like, if you're doing one thing to the next, the second one isn't necessarily easier. Like Jack and I were speaking prior to this conversation, and we were just saying how we're actually not leveraging much of what we've built for this current brand for this new brand. But the biggest thing is the learnings that you take. And I think there's no such thing as failure unless you're not learning from the mistakes that you've made. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that we are taking over, is just the lessons that we've learned and understanding, okay, what has worked, what hasn't worked, why hasn't it worked? Okay, let's approach it differently. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how this is received in comparison based on the changes that we've made.
And one question I didn't ask earlier, but it's definitely one of the more popular questions we get, is how did you find your manufacturer?
Great question. And that's not easy. So my business partner, Matt, he's an unbelievable engineer and designer. He happened to work at a product manufacturing design firm whilst this was a side hustle. So he's like, okay, he identified, okay, what was the skill set and what were the contacts that he needed in order for him to basically fulfill what he needed to for the business, and he moved into that. And with that, he built up the knowledge and the network that he needed, and also through mentors and other individuals that had done something similar as well. And we were sort of lucky enough to be put in contact with a turnkey manufacturer. And what a turnkey manufacturer is they're essentially a group. They're a partner in, say, for this example, China, and they have the connections to the actual manufacturers themselves. Yes, they do take a cut. However, they're the ones with the network, and you basically deal with them. They provide you with a project manager, a QC manager, etc., and they basically build a team for you. And so I would highly recommend looking to something like that. There are a lot of businesses that operate that service. Going directly to the manufacturer can be a little bit harder, especially from the language barrier or the culture barrier. But we were super fortunate to sort of get pointed in the right direction by mentors and networks that we had managed to establish. And this sort of comes back to that whole idea of what I said before, is keep it a side hustle until you become the bottleneck. And the reason is because if you work in the right industry, you're gaining knowledge and network for what's going to help benefit you down the path.
Yep. Yeah, as we said before, every overnight success was 3 or 4 years worth of work.
Seriously. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been super valuable. I think everybody's going to get a lot of great takeaways from this. If people want to follow up, find out more about you and more about MOUS, more about your upcoming project, where's a good place to look?
So MOUS Fitness, so mousfitness.com. That's probably the best website for the current business. But to be completely honest with you, I'm more than happy for, if anyone's got a product question or needs a hand, whatever it may be, just reach out to me on Instagram at Jarahad, Jarahad. Yes, it's a difficult one spelt. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but they still have fun with it to this day. Or shoot me an email if you contact the contact page for MOUS. It'll get to me eventually. So please feel free to reach out.
Yep. So you heard it, guys. Definitely reach out, Jarahad, if there's any questions you have about manufacturing, branding, or worldwide distribution. Done an extremely impressive thing with what he did with MOUS. Can't wait to see what he does with his next product. We'll have to get you back on once you've launched the second one to see how the learnings have changed the way that the second one
Fingers
launches.
crossed.
Because
Fingers crossed.
yeah, I'm sure it'll be a lot smoother ride. But thanks for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
If you like the show, remember to share it with friends and coworkers. You can also check us out and share past episodes at blitzgrowth.com. Hit subscribe and leave a review letting us know how this podcast has personally helped you and your business. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover, make sure to send us an email via blitzgrowth.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on our next episode.